What's going on, guys? And today we're hearing that Lauri Markkanen might finally be available for trade. Yes, Chris Mannix of Sports Illustrated and NBC is reporting that the Utah Jazz are open to trading the All-Star forward and switch, kind of he can play the big if you need him to. He can also play, he's more of a natural forward. He can also moonlight at the three. He's one of, the premier scorers in the NBA. He's a guy who's averaged over 20 points a game over the last few seasons. And with Utah entering the full rebuild and having somewhat of a core with Ace Bailey, Keontae George, I don't know what's going to happen with the Walker Kessler now that he's allegedly not going to be extension eligible. So here are 13 realistic trades I came up with every team that would have a reason or somewhat of a feasible, value-worthy trade to put into consideration. Every trade includes at least one unprotected first-round pick, and your guess of how many first-round picks is as good as mine. So we're not going to really discuss the draft capital besides saying which team has better draft capital and which teams don't have as good, because we'd assume every team would have to at least give up some, if not all of their draft capital. So let's get right into it. I'd like to hear your thoughts. Do you think they finally trade Lauri Markkanen? Because I do think his value's at the highest that it'll ever be. So with that being said, let's get right into it. Comment, like, subscribe. It'll help out the channel a ton. So what are we thinking? Well, I think we got to talk about every team and why teams would be interested or why they would be looking to make a move for someone like Lauri Markkanen. So who's the first team we're going to discuss? We'll start off with the Pelicans, because if Joe Dumars and Troy Weaver know how to do one thing, it's to do the unexpected. Now, why did I put the Pelicans there? Well, if they feel like Zion and the core is actually better than we think, they could hypothetically offer a package. Now, their picks are going to vary. Obviously, other teams could offer better ones, and I know Dejounte Murray being, as you guys see, Dejounte Murray, Saddiq Bey, Jordan Hawkins, former first-round pick, and draft capital for Lauri Markkanen, Kevin Love, and Svi Mykhailiuk. And to me, I think if you look at this, Markkanen, he's making $46.3 million. He's an all-star, but he's the perfect match to put next to a guy like Zion. His floor spacing and scoring ability is going to be an upgrade to whoever. Zion's probably going to be playing the power forward, but imagine how big this team is now with Kevon Looney coming off the bench, Yves Messi probably starting, Lauri at the 4, Zion at the 3, Herb Jones and Trey Murphy, and have Zion maybe be the ball handler, or you could really just start Lauri at the center and then have Jordan Poole be the point guard. But you keep Jordan Poole and Williamson get the space they need to operate, and the starting lineup of, in my opinion, Trey Murphy, Herb Jones, Yves Messi, Zion, Lauri, those guys in the lineup is going to be one of the more explosive ones in the league. So I think that's good. And you could argue, does that make them a contender? Like, they could have enough elite talent to push them to the top of the edge. So, and I think the Jazz, if they get someone, Dejounte Murray, is recovering off of an Achilles injury, and we don't know if he's going to be available at all this season, if he's going to be the same guy, but he could be a guy who can be the adult in the room and maybe rebuild his value and trade him down the road once he is healthy, because he was an all NBA level guard. Obviously, he's not going to be that level anymore, but if he can be like a top 20 starting point guard, that could be some value. However, that's going to take some, obviously, things working out in their favor, but to me, I think that's a good one. Or they could just buy him out and just let him go there because they would rather have the cap flexibility. And Jordan Hawkins is a promising young shooter to pair with Ace Bailey and Bryce Sensabaugh. And then Saddiq Bey is a useful two-way guy who could also be a reclamation project or a buyout. Now, the Next one is the Minnesota Timberwolves. Julius Randle, Donte DiVincenzo, and Rob Dillingham. You could substitute Rob Dillingham for either Jalen Clark. I don't think they're going to trade Johan because they just got him. So Jalen Clark, Terrence Shannon, Rob Dillingham, you could interchange one of them. So one young guy with Julius Randle and Donte DiVincenzo making up the salary. Marketing comes in, and dude, he's an upgrade from Rand. Now, some people might say Randle's a better defender, maybe a better rebounder, or even a better passer. And because the Randle two-time All-NBA third team, so people forget that. However, I think he's a perfect complement to Rudy Gobert and Anthony Edwards, and a lineup of Conley, Anthony Edwards, Markkanen, McDaniels, and Gobert is the perfect balance of three-point shooting and defense. And they acquire a superior offensive talent in Randle, whom they send out, solidifying, I think, their position as a contender that could upset the Oklahoma City Thunder, who are the reigning defending champs. While Utah gets a high-level score and a borderline All-NBA, All-Star talent in Julius Randle, who could either be a short-term trade asset, like trade bait for a better package, or a player who can shoulder the scoring load that's younger. Rob Dillingham is a young, high-upside point guard entering his second year, and they're still trying to figure it out with Walter Clayton, Keontae George, Isaiah Collier. And Donte DiVincenzo, another guy that could be used as trade bait, but he's the type of player, winning player, that they would like in the rotation. This would allow the Timberwolves then to have Terrence Shannon, Jalen Clark, and Leonard Miller take up Donte DiVincenzo's minutes. Now, and obviously, whatever first-round picks the Timberwolves could give up, they would give up in this scenario. Now, and they've done business before with the Gobert deal, so it wouldn't be the shockingest move in the world. Next up is obviously going to be the San Antonio Spurs. So the Spurs, this one I actually kind of like. They would basically say, hey, we're done waiting for Devin to develop. Keldon Johnson, we don't want to be paying you this money to come off the bench. Jeremy Sohan, we're not going to extend you. And obviously Julian Champagnie was just thrown in there for salary filler. They bring in a veteran in Kevin Love. They also bring in a shooter in Svi Mykhailiuk, and obviously the big package, Lauri Markkanen, and then whatever draft capital. Because then you have Markkanen and Victor Wembanyama as your front court. And you have De'Aaron Fox. That's pretty crazy lineup. Like, I actually love that. And he's like the perfect secondary star, floor spacer. Playing Markkanen at power forward allows Wemby to be the center. And you have a starting lineup that's probably going to be Fox, Castle, Barnes, Markkanen, Wembanyama, which is absolutely nuts when you think about it. And then eventually Harper would come there. They'd be a contender for sure with this move. And they'd be consolidating promising players that haven't proven to be essential guys. So they would be able to just send, Vassell, Johnson, Sohan, and Champagnie, that are guys who, yeah, they're part of the rotation, but you're acquiring a proven all-star who's immediately accelerating this timeline into a contender status. And for the Jazz, they get a bunch of young guys. They need a wing, and that wing, one of them being a guy who is going to be able to come in and really just push for minutes. Keldon Johnson, someone that they could flip. And Jeremy Sohan's going to help shore up their defense, especially if they're not going to extend Walker Kessler. Jeremy Sohan's going to be someone that they could have there. So that's my whole 2 cents on that one. Next up, we have the Philadelphia 76ers. I think this is going to be an interesting one because it would have to be Paul George. Allegedly, Paul George was already going to sign with the Utah Jazz when free agency happened, but he ended up signing with the Sixers because Sixers came out and actually beat the Jazz's offer. But if that hadn't happened, he might be wearing a Utah jersey. So Paul George for Lauri Markkanen. The Sixers would have to give up all the first round capital to get this done. And to me, maybe if you want, you have them throw in Svi Mykhailiuk and or Kevin Love in the deal and maybe send like Andre Drummond out there to help shore it out. But Markkanen, phenomenal fit next to Joel Embiid, gives you a scorer and a floor spacer who can play alongside or alleviate Joel Embiid whenever he sits or misses games, as well as fits well with Tyrese Maxey and VJ Edgecombe, as well as Quentin Grimes. He's just a better long-term fit for Paul George, who's aging, and gives them this dynamic pick and pop option. And I think cements them better as a contender. While the Jazz, yeah, they get Paul George. Hopefully they can rebuild his value, or they just buy him out if he's just falling off a cliff, which is possible. But that's the main thing. Next up, the Phoenix Suns. Yes, Grayson Allen and Jalen Green for Lauri Markkanen. So for this, it's the Suns basically flip Green, who already Green Booker. It's on paper a weird fit. Maybe they make it work because Booker's a really good passer. But having Markkanen, the fourth high level, basically like not fourth high level, but being the secondary high level scorer, that would be nice. Okay, this is a team that, yeah, they have Mark Williams saying, "Come on, Mile Watch." Now you replace Ryan Dunn in that lineup, who will move to the bench. With Lauri Markkanen, you have Dylan Brooks, Devin Booker, whoever at the guard spot, or Royce O'Neal in there, and have Booker run the point guard. This offense becomes, on paper, unstoppable, which I think at least pushes them into a playoff team, like the 6th seed. Maybe even better, like it makes them an attractive situation. And for the Jazz, you get a cornerstone guard potentially who has all-star potential in Jalen Green. And you can either have Grayson Allen or Royce O'Neal to make the money work. And that gives you a trade bait, a 3D player to fit with the young guys, and whatever first round picks. Now, the Detroit Pistons. This is the one I think is the most realistic. If out of all the deals that like kind of makes sense for a team to want to do, it's the Detroit Pistons. Walker Kessler is allegedly not going to sign an extension. He's going to go into restricted free agency. You bring in Beef Stew, who's already been extended on $15 million a year as an insurance policy, and then you also get Jaden Ivey. Jaden Ivey's extension eligible. It looks like the fit and the three-point shooting is working with Cade Cunningham, but he got hurt, and it's probably easier for the Pistons to use Jaden Ivey to get a guy like Lauri Markkanen, who's going to be a seamless fit, than trying to continue to fit two ball-dominant players. While Jaden Ivey immediately solves the point guard of the future question for the Jazz, where they would have a legit point guard of the future. And then they could also maybe walk away with guys like Ron Holland, Paul Reed, Bobby Klintman, and because they're giving up so much talent, maybe the Pistons give up only one heavily protected first rounder, or like just basically not as valuable picks as other teams would have to, because marketing the perfect pick and pop, floor spacing forward to play with Cade Cunningham, and he would obviously, next to Tobias Harris, who would then be able to play three or come off the bench, like he'd be the successor or make Tobias Harris more movable. Also, this deal, they could trade Tobias Harris instead of Isaiah Stewart and do a Tobias Harris, Jaden Ivey, Paul Reed, Bobby Klintman deal. That's the other option here. And I think just doing this, basically consolidating, promising young players, and, extension eligible player in Jaden Ivey for a guaranteed all-star would allow this team to become dark horse contenders. And for the Jazz, they get a potential all-star guard in Jaden Ivey to be their primary ball handler. Beef Stew and Paul Reed are energetic bigs that help bring value up while also being insurance to replace Walker Kessler. And I think that one's decent. The Utah Jazz Miami Heat deal. The Miami Heat are obviously going to try to lowball this, but they would want to get off of Terry Rozier. And I think in this deal where they wouldn't want to give up a first round pick or make it heavily protected, Terry Rozier and basically all their young guys, Nikola Jovic, Khalil Ware, and Jaime Jaquez. I know Jovic, because he just signed an extension, he isn't tradable, I think, till January 15th. And multiple guys here mentioned if they had recently signed, they won't be eligible for a trade till either January 15th or December 15th. So keep that in mind. But Markkanen, obviously, next to Bam Adebayo and Tyler Hero and Andrew Wiggins and Norman Powell, makes this team just a better spaced offense makes more sense. It can go together, and it would be something that would push them into contention. And they just give up all their young guys that are going to be needing to be paid. Instead of waiting for them to develop, they get a guy who's going to be able to contribute right now. And the Jazz, they get 2 high upside guys in Jovic and Ware, and then a reclamation project in Jaime Jaquez, and potential first-round picks, which makes complete sense, in my opinion. So let's move on to the Toronto Raptors, and I've said it before, they're paying RJ Barrett, Emmanuel Quickley, Scotty Barnes, and Brandon Ingram. Brandon Ingram and Scotty Barnes aren't going anywhere, and they need a guard. So Lauri Markkanen actually makes it at Scotty Barnes, and Brandon Ingram could be like your 2 wings. Then you go with Markkanen at the 4. You have 5 Pirtle, and then Quickley's your point guard. And this would make it basically an upgrade on RJ Barrett. You're turning RJ Barrett into Lauri Markkanen. You give up Jacoby Walter, Jonathan Magbo as young pieces, with Ochai Agbaji being a guy who's extension eligible that they probably weren't planning on paying. And Markkanen is backed up then by Colin Murray-Boyles and Ulrich Jumanji, and he just gives them another star. Like, now you have a 3-headed monster, and Markkanen, Ingram, and Barnes, and then Pirtle as the defensive big. A Barnes, Markkanen, Pirtle like trio just gives you a lot of length and shooting and like rebounding. The trio combination plus Brandon Ingram throw in there. So this actually kind of accelerates the timeline, makes them a playoff team, top 6 seed in the East. And the Jazz, they get themselves somebody who's paid on a cheap contract, a decent contract on RJ Barrett, who has all-star ability, former high lottery pick. Get Ochai Agbaji, who they know. And I think he's someone that, look, I really do believe that he's the type of guy that could, coming back here, might have a better fit than his first go around. Because I don't know if you guys remember, he was part of that original Markkanen trade that traded from the Caps to the Jazz. So, and they get themselves Jacoby Walter, another lottery pick. So I think that one actually makes a lot of sense. Now, the Charlotte Hornets. They've been trying to get off of Miles Bridges. I really feel like this would have to be a deal built around Miles Bridges, Pat Connaughton's and expiring, and then to John Saloon, whatever draft capital, and then Lauri Markkanen. So Markkanen, obviously, with Brandon Miller and LaMelo Ball, would just give you pick and pop ability, huge upgrade over Miles Bridges at the power forward position, make this team bigger, and make the front court not much of such a big question mark with Mason Plumlee and obviously the Ryan Kalkbrenner, Moussa Diabate. And then the young guy they give up is Tejan Saloon. This team did the Yusuf Nurkic trade for Colin Sexton this offseason, so they've already done business before. And Charlotte gets off of Miles Bridges, who was overpaid, and he's just really not a winning player for them. And he goes to Utah, where they can either see him as a guy that they want to rebuild his value and trade, or just keep around so his contract expires. And he's someone, like I said, it could be their leading scorer in the short term or a trade chip. And Tejan Saloon's the young guy. Obviously, they give up the first round pick. And Tejan Saloon, he's ways away, but they need front court help. So he kind of fills a need there. And Papping, someone that they could flip or buy out, is an expiring contract. And then obviously the first round pick or picks that they would get would compensate them. So the Portland Trailblazers, this is a deal where I think they would want to give off their expiring contracts of Robert Williams, Matisse Thybulle, and then just try to get off that Jeremy Grant money. To me, I mean, obviously, if Anthony Simons hadn't been traded, this would have been Anthony Simons instead of Jeremy Grant, but Markkanen, joining Denny Avdia, Tamani Kamara, and Scoot Henderson, Drew Holiday, would just make, and Shaedon Sharpe, would make this team, obviously Markkanen's just a far superior player, a better shooter and scorer than Jeremy Grant. And Tamani Kamara and Donovan Clingan, or Will Ol and Hanson Yang, will be able to shore up any defensive shortcomings that Markkanen brings. And with his shooting, that opened up the driving lanes for like Denny Hoppy, Shane Sharp, and Scoot Henderson. And he'd also be a great fit for Hanson Yang and Donovan Clingan. So this would make them a top 6 seed in the West. While the Utah Jazz, yeah, they would have Jeremy Grant, who they try to rebuild his value to trade, or they'd buy out, or they just happen to be a starter right there, a locker room presence. While Robert Williams, he's a defensive guy who's on an expiring contract. Durability is the biggest question with him. And he's someone that they could buy out, flip down the road, or just let his contract expire. And then same thing with T. Stiebel. Durability is the biggest question, but he's a great defender and he's on an expiring contract. So it makes sense right there. Sacramento Kings. Malik Monk, Keegan Murray, Dario Saric, Isaac Jones, and whatever draft compensation you think would be worthy. Markkanen, Keegan, they said in the past that they didn't want to trade Keegan Murray for Lauri Markkanen because they thought Keegan could be just as good, the Monty McNair regime. This isn't Monty McNair, it's Scott Perry now. Scott Perry decides we're not going to pay Keegan, and we don't want to wait till Keegan gets to be as good as Lowry because we don't have time to wait. And now you flip Dario Saric, who didn't fit the team to begin with, and Isaac Jones is thrown in there as salary filler, and Malik Monk is a guy that the Jazz could flip by expanding this trade into a multi-team trade, or maybe even eventually just doing whatever needs to be done. So I think the most interesting part about all of this is that if you look for the Kings, Domantas Sabonis and Markkanen and Zach LaVine and DeMar DeRozan, having those guys together is a lot more floor spacing than there was before. Plus, like, Markkanen's a better player than Keegan. And yeah, I think, as we said, they get Keegan Murray, who fits really well next to Ace Bailey and gives you a potential cornerstone that you can extend, as he's going to be extension eligible, while Malik Monk's someone that you could keep as a scorer or flip down the road. To me, I think it's a solid squad. It's a solid squad. And why wouldn't you keep it like that? And yeah, obviously you need the provided draft capital to make this work, but it's one that I think that could work. Next, Santi Aldama. This is the Memphis Grizzlies. So Santi Aldama, Brandon Clark, John Conchar, Scottie Pippen Jr., Gigi Jackson, and maybe one first-round pick for Lauri Markkanen. And the way this works is that you basically turn Santi Aldama and Gigi Jackson into Markkanen, who is a better player, and he would help space the floor for Morant and restore, I think, the Grizzlies into underrated contenders. And I think Memphis, by consolidating Brandon Clark's contract, he's like not the player that you want to be paying almost $13 million to. And you give Gigi Jackson and Santi Aldama, who could develop alongside Ace Bailey and Walter Clayton. And if Keontae George is still considered a part of that future. So those are all reasons right there why you want that. And also Santi Aldama could be Lauri Markkanen 2.0, that he's somebody that they bring in and he ends up breaking out for them and becomes like an influential part of this team and their core. That's like legit. And Scottie Pippen gives them another guard. So I don't think they would need to give up that many picks to do that deal. And last but not least, I believe, is the last deal. Yes, the Dallas Mavericks, they're always looking to do a deal, it seems like, with Nico Harrison. And Klay Thompson's older. Max Christie's a young guy. Caleb Martin's on a cheap deal. Jaden Hardy's a young guy. Dwight Powell's an expiring. And whatever draft capital for Lauri Markkanen and Svi Mykhailiuk. This is obviously an upgrade for them over PJ Washington, which will make PJ Washington off the bench and then give them a starting lineup of either Anthony Davis and Derek Lively and Lauri Markkanen, which would be massive, or Anthony Davis and Lauri Markkanen and Cooper Flagg. Like, this makes them such a favorite contender, even without Mr. Kyrie Irving being healthy, that it's wild. Like, it converts a mix of guards and contracts that aren't really like essential players into an all-star forward that would make them title favorites, probably, even with or without Kyrie. Now the Jazz get themselves a young guy in Jane Hardy. They get someone that they could flip in Klay Thompson, a future Hall of Famer, who could be a mentor or someone to flip. And then Caleb Martin's a solid two-way wing and whatever draft compensation, obviously a young guy in Max Christie as well. So that is all of them, guys. I hope you guys did enjoy. What do you guys think of those trades, and which one would you choose if you were the Utah Jazz, and why? Let me know. Till next time, guys. Peace out.